Hello, and just before we start today's video, just a quick disclaimer off the bat. I have had this system, the DXP480T, for the better part of 4 or 5, maybe even close to 6 weeks. And lots of parts of this video have been filmed over that time as I've done lots of testing and evaluation of this system. Unfortunately, the software that UGREEN provided with this over time has seen numerous updates throughout the course of that testing, and consequently throughout the course of the editing of this video things have changed. UGREEN's position on third-party operating systems, the performance of the M2 NVMe's, what exactly are the feature set included with the software. So there may be the odd inaccuracy in the first half of this video, which was recorded a couple of weeks ago, which may have changed over time, so I apologise in advance. And I just wanted to put this disclaimer here in case the unit that you are seeing later on in the video doesn't seem to match quite right in terms of the software and capabilities I talk about here in the first half. But apart from that, let's crack on with our review. Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we're talking about this. This is the DXP480T from UGREEN. Catchy name, right? But them's the breaks. I'll be straight with you. The start of 2024, and indeed most of 2023, one big subject kept bubbling to the top when it comes to the world of network attached storage, and that is Flash. Flash was a system of utilising fast media such as SSDs in both SATA and NVMe form that all of a sudden became accessible to the average Joe Blogg's home user. For a long time, Flash utilisation was enterprise, it was Google, it was the sky, but now all of a sudden users can get on board with domestic level Flash. And I would argue last year there was one device, this one, from Acer Store, the Flash Store 12 Pro and the Flash Store 6, knocking around for about 450 and 800 odd nicker respectively, rocking out the gate with 6 or 12 NVMe slots and 10 GBE. This, I would argue, was the gateway drug to a lot of users hopping on board with Flash systems, and from that we saw so many different variants of private home domestic desktop SSD storage. And I'll be straight with you, when it comes down to it, in terms of hardware, in terms of capability, in terms of internal and external bandwidth for your money, this is the holy grail. Right now, this system, rocking out the gate with 4 M.2 NVMe slots, technically 5, and on board with Thunderbolt and 10 GBE connectivity, is the answer to the prayers of many content creator, photo and video editor all around the world. However, is it perfect? No, there are some hurdles that are going to put some of you off. Notwithstanding, this is UGREEN's first foray into the world of network attached storage there. And this isn't just their only solution. Rocking out the gate in March 2024, they're actually rolling out around 4 to 6 different hardware profiles. A 2-bay, a 4-bay, a couple of 4-bays actually, a 6-bay, an 8-bay and a Flash system as well. Different hardware configurations all the way across the board. And this one is the only Flash system in their midst. Rocking out the gate with an Intel i5 processor, 12th generation, and some of the ports and connectivity that I've already talked about. Today, we're going to talk about this system's hardware. We're going to talk about its software just a wee bit, but also explain why. We're not going to go into too much detail yet, and ultimately help you decide if right now taking to Kickstarter is the way to go forward and get hold of one of these. Because that is right. This system is arriving on crowdfunding, which I know for about 50% of the audience you've all gone, oh, no, wait, I'm done.
Fool this man!
And I get it. I really, really do. When it comes to a lot of turnkey NAS solutions, your QNAP, your Synologies, your whatever, the big appeal when it comes to buying anything online is this isn't like the wild west of the internet. Now buying stuff online, you've got guarantees. You've got all of that kind of hold your hand stuff going on with retailers. Crowdfunding always feels like it's got an element of risk, and that is right. This is going to have an element of risk. You are purchasing a product from a crowdfunding platform. The crowdfunding price for this right now from UGREEN via Kickstarter, the launch price is $479, which is comedically cheap, at least now at the time of recording. You never know when these things change, but the recommended retail price that they're aiming for when this system finally comes to bat is $779, which is still weirdly cheap for a 4-bay capable Flash system like this. Just to put that into a bit of perspective, This is a mini PC utilising a micro ITX board with an AMD Ryzen 7 SoC processor inside, and this is the Intel i5 10-core powered system. The scale is absolutely tiny. Look at the size of some of these systems here. There's going to be a lot of content creators looking at a system like this thinking, whoo, that's going to leave a small footprint on my desk. Sign me up, buttercup. What do you actually get for your money? This right now is, I would argue, not really a prototype, but this is the first revision of the device being rolled out by UGREEN, which is the intended, fingers crossed, product for the crowdfunding there. So right now, if you are going to go down the road of crowdfunding, again, do know the risk. It's not the same as going to Amazon and chucking in your card details. For a product that hasn't quite reached retail yet, I'll be straight, it's actually a very attractive package here. So from that, you get the recorded box there that arrived, the retail box, I should say. Inside, we open that up. It opens out into this box here. Lovely little pretty box. We'll get rid of our cardboard. Alongside that, inside it arrives wrapped in that plastic. And inside, what do we get for ourselves? Well, first and foremost, we get a UGREEN PSU. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who cares? It's a PSU. Yes, it's an external PSU, which for a system of this scale makes a lot of sense. It is a 140 watt compact external PSU. But the reason I talk about it being branded is because, and again, I've mentioned this in other videos, what sets this system apart from lots, and I do mean lots, of crowd-funded solutions that have rocked out the gate in the last 6 to 8 months, for good or for bad, they are an established brand. All the other solutions we've seen have rocked out the gate from relatively unknown brands, either brands that have already utilised crowdfunding already, such as Ice Whale and their Zimmer series, or for complete unknowns. They've been rolling out solutions from brands that haven't existed, and they're hoping upon hope, such as, a great example would have been LinkStation, that have got a large history in laptops and more, moving into the area of NAS. Now, UGREEN is probably one of the most confident entrances into that second category. UGREEN have already been around in the market quite a long time, with lots of PC peripherals and add-ons, and particularly power suppliers and power-related components. That's why having their own high-quality PSU there that already rates very well online as it stands. Also included with the kit, we've got our Ethernet cable, but again, to their credit, I'm kind of impressed by the production quality of it. It's a UGREEN branded Ethernet cable there. It's gold tipped as well, and that's a Cat 7 cable as well. Something you don't really see from many other brands rocking out cables arguably of that kind of quality. On top of that, you've got the screws there for removing and installing individual M2 NVMe. Rocks out the gate with a Cat 7 UGREEN branded cable, and again, that is a Cat 7 gold tipped cable as well. Quite a decent high quality cable at that. Screws for installing or of course removing M2 NVMe's, more on that later on, and heat pads for each of the NVMe's. 4 in total this system arrives with, and the system, when it does have the M2 NVMe's installed in the base, more on that later, utilise heat dissipation and active fan cooling there on the base. Information, we've got 2 years of manufacturer's warranty detailed there, and a paper instruction manual. Now, it's the little things. I've mentioned this in other videos, but little tiny quality of life and little tiny presentation things that I'm seeing from a lot of these brands in the last 12 months to try and compete with the big boys over here, I really like. The way this has been presented is probably one of the most confident, turnkey, kind of out of the bigger boys option in the market right now. But let's talk about quality. Let's discuss design. Now, despite its rather modest scale, there's actually a decent amount of thought and work that's gone into the design of this chassis. For example, ventilation on the device, we've got a nice passive ventilation point on 3 of the 4 sides on this device. Also, alongside a fan that's based on the top of the CPU inside, and that is a fan that is not only active fan and surrounded the CPU cooler, but with copper piping as well. The base of the system has additional vented fans there, all of which with a mesh cover panel, and 2 small laptop scale fans there based in the underneath the M2 NVMe portion there on a large metallic heat dissipation base. Okay, so let's do some noise testing on this real quick. Right now, this is the fans on this system sent to default. If we have a look at the base of the system, we can make out those tiny little fan modules there at the base. We'll pop that down there. We've got our fan located here. We've got the decibel meter giving us real-time information. So first up, let's get some idle noise with nothing going on, with the fans on default. Next up, we're going to set the fans to quiet mode. So this is the fans on their lowest setting possible. And finally, we're going to set the fans on the system now to full active use. Let's go ahead and hear those fans in full active use. Actually, one moment, the fans have now spun down completely. And now the fans in full active use. And now setting those fans back to default mode there for them to be reactive to when the system is in use. Ultimately, I'd say right now it is still a very quiet system when in operation. We're seeing the decibel meter there, much louder than when I'm just talking, of course. But again, in default mode, if we just let it go back to its original format just for a few seconds. It's still comfortably in the 20s in terms of decibel throughout all of those different scenarios. For such a compact device, it's incredibly well constructed. It does not feel cheap, which again is normally a hallmark of when these systems kind of fall down. If I bring it over to the other camera, we're able to see there along the layout of the system, it's a very well put together device, and indeed it took me quite a while to figure out just exactly how to dismantle this device for when we were taking a closer look and taking a lot of our stock photos of the system. Now, port and connectivity is completely on the rear. There is no front mounted connectivity of any kind. Also, some of you may have noticed a slight omission that we're going to talk about later on. When it comes to the front of the device, there is no front mounted USB there. We've got our one touch copy button, of course, but that's really it. If we want to get access to our M.2 NVMe slots, what we need to do is to remove this base level panel. Now, I mentioned in the introduction that there is 4, technically 5, M.2 NVMe slots inside this system. Now, that is that the system has 4 2280 length M.2 NVMe slots underneath this base panel, and internally there is an additional 2242 length M.2 slot, which is occupied by a Phison E13T SSD inside there. That is used for the operating system that UGREEN provide on the NASync series for all of their devices, but they've managed to actually get it onto that 2242 SSD inside, thereby not occupying one of those 4 available M.2 NVMe slots there. It's very sleekly presented there. The same kind of font and presentation that we saw on some of the desktop devices there. This feeds into those 4 individual M.2 NVMe slots. Now, I've discussed this with UGREEN, and they are stating that slots 1 and 2 are PCIe Gen 4x4 with no limitation, no downgrades there. The further 2 slots are PCIe Gen 3x2, originally 3x4 but downgraded to ×2 there. So although it is a Gen 4 system, and that CPU that we'll talk about later on, that i5 has got 20 lanes to play with, it has to be stated that because of the Thunderbolt and 10 GBE connectivity and the layout of those lanes, they've had to make some limitations, that being Gen 4x4 and ×4, and then ×2 with Gen 4 and Gen 3 respectively there. Now, interestingly, when it comes to the heat dissipation of this product, and if I leave that there, now that base panel squeezes it into that area, but it's also got an enormous metal plate here that feeds directly into the individual silicon heat pads that you put on top of your individual M2 NVMe's. This panel here not only is going to be drawing the heat from each of those individual NVMe's that are plugged inside into that panel, but thanks to those individual fans as well, it's going to be drawing that heat beautifully into the air. It's a lovely bit of design there. Now, how much that's going to impact operational noise when the system's in use, that is a question that we're going to have to debate, because two active fans, although they're very small fans here, we are still talking about an NVMe system here. That means heat is going to be something, it's going to happen. Alongside an i5, 10-core CPU inside, heat is going to be a factor, and particularly if you're going to be utilising the majority of the ports and connections on this, it's a matter for debate. But the way it connects with no loose wires going straight into that panel there at the top that feeds immediately into a junction there. We tried running this box, by the way, without this connected to the top when we were looking at some SSDs that did not have a removable heatsink. And if you don't attach this panel when the system's in operation, you can disable the beeping, because it will beep to say the fans aren't connected, but these fans are exclusively there to provide cooling to those SSDs, with the CPU having its own fan. So there is a question mark whether you wanted to operate this device upside down and not use the fans, and it would reduce the noise significantly, but then it would be feeding the CPU fan into that panel there, and although it's got ventilation along all the way around the edge to feed out some of that air, or at least draw in air in some cases, there's debatable, use to whether the system would just get too hot and potentially throttle your performance. But overall, the design of this system, I really, really like. I think it's very slickly put together. And although we'll talk about the internal hardware in just a moment, overall, I'm really happy with the design. Before we even talk about the internal hardware though, let's talk a little bit about those ports and connections. I feel like we've buried the lead a bit there. Now, this system arrives with, as you can see there, numerous USB connectivity. We've got USB Type-C and USB Type-A. On top of that, we've got an HDMI 2.1 4K 60 frames per second slot to play with. Now, those USB ports there, one of them is USB 3.2 Gen 2, so 10 gigabits per second. But the Type-Cs that you're seeing here are Thunderbolt 4 and USB 4 compatible there. Now, that is going to be lovely stuff until you find out they can only be utilized for the system as a host. What I mean by that, it means you can attach USB storage drives to this, or even potentially Thunderbolt peripherals to this device, but the system is going to work as the host. The system won't allow you to utilize Thunderbolt to Ethernet connectivity, such as you would find in a QNAP Thunderbolt NAS system. Those Thunderbolt ports are only to be utilized with the system as the host, not your Mac or Windows system. Again, storage drives and the like. There is the question of whether you would utilize a Thunderbolt to 10GBE adapter to perhaps attach another Thunderbolt port to this, but you'd have to be heavily reliant on drivers being created for this system that will allow the host NAS system utilizing Thunderbolt to be able to take advantage of a Thunderbolt to 10GBE adapter, and it's very specific a Quantia adapter you would need to take advantage of something like that. But still, at least you've got it there to bolt on some super fast storage. And for those of you migrating away from a Thunderbolt DAS setup for your photo video editing, this will allow you to edit on this device over 10GBE, but also attach those existing Thunderbolt DAS devices, your Lacey's, your G-Tech or whatever, to those drives, and then utilize those as local backup drives. That is something that I think a lot of users could get around and take advantage of to repurpose and recycle a lot of their hardware, moving away from DAS onto NAS there. Now, I mentioned the 10GBE connection. There's good and bad news there, of course. One, you've got a 10GBE connection. Lovely stuff, 1,000 megabytes per second. You've got 4 NVMe's in here. There's absolutely no way this system can't fully saturate a 10G connection. But at the same time, do you see any other network ports on there? Do you see any? You don't, do you? That's because this system has only got one Ethernet port. One Ethernet port to play with there. That means that this system, once you've connected to 10GBE, if you wanted to do editing directly on this, you can't connect it to the network, can you? Well, yes, because not only has it got the 10GBE port, but inside there's a Wi-Fi 6E adapter and 2 antennae running off that I'll show you later on in the hardware internal section. So, yes, there's no network failover, but it does have that Wi-Fi connectivity, and I've asked UGREEN about this, and they state although the Thunderbolt connectivity is host client only with the connected devices as clients. The wireless network adapter inside this device does support both this system running as the host and as a client to another network. But I'll be very interested to see just to what extent that is supported in the network connectivity, because as mentioned, the software this is arriving with right now is still in beta right now. So I'm not sure if that feature is included, and I still wouldn't trust it, particularly for 24/7 utilization, to the very least until it's come out of beta into full utilization there. But for now, let's grab our screwdriver and take a little look inside, shall we? Taking a good look on the inside of this device, the first thing we needed to do was remove that front panel. That front panel there allowed us to take a good look inside at our first board area. There are our individual M.2s along the bottom here, and they are clearly indicated about which one is Gen 4 and which one is Gen 3. Don't worry, we'll go through that in UnRAID later on and going via the terminal. Now, alongside these, and again, you don't have to fully populate this on day one, they do have RAID support in their software at launch, so you will be able to scale up that RAID and add drives later on. Alongside that, we've got our DDR5 memory module here, and that is an 8 gig DDR5 module at that. So again, 8 gig's pretty good. I personally would rack it up. This system supports up to 64 gig of memory, and although it doesn't support ECC, the i5 processor in question does not support that. At the very least, you've got that on-die stuff, which I know ECC veterans are going to immediately scoff and put negative stuff in the comments. I'm sorry, but there you go. But what's really interesting is down here, that drive. As mentioned earlier on, this is technically a 5-drive system. That 5th drive there, that Phison E13 drive there, is where our operating system lives. So you don't even need to have drives in this to have it up and running. You can run this with no drives inside and get access to the software. But of course, as this is an M.2 NVMe system and not a SATA storage drive system, you can't hot swap these drives. You can't just boot it up and pop one of these in. You have to power it down every time there. But nonetheless, I like what I'm seeing here, so I think what we need to do before we go ahead and look at that lovely little Wi-Fi 6 module and those individual antennae working to the other side is we need to get this next panel off and take a good closer look at what's going on underneath. So the next panel being removed there, we can make out those 2 antennae there. If we bring that closer, you've got those 2. We rotate it around. You're able to make out the 2 antennae that are located on the inside of that casing there. So they're back mounted along with the other ports. But if we have a little look at the other, or the rest of the MOBO here, we're seeing, so immediately we've got our 10 GBE controller here at the top. And alongside 10 GBE controller, of course, we've got this massive CPU fan here. I'd say massive, it's relatively massive. It's actually occupying quite a huge amount of space here on that main board. And that main board there with that fan there on top, it's utilizing that Intel i5 processor. It's the Intel i5-1235U. Yes, I had to look at my notes because I've looked at a lot of CPUs recently. That Intel i5 processor is a 10-core processor. It's 2 power, 8 efficiency there. And alongside that is a 12-thread processor at that with a burst of performance of up to 4.4 gigahertz there. Again, as mentioned, it supports up to 64 gig of DDR5 memory, and that's 5200 megahertz memory at that. It's a 20-lane Gen 4 processor, so it's all been spread out pretty hardcore there. And the TDP, again, the Intel Core, the SoC mobile components we've been talking about in 11th, 12th, and now 13th gen are just, you know, power-wise incredible in TDP. This is a 15 to 55 watt TDP CPU there, released at the start of 2022. So it's not the newest component, but certainly in terms of NAS and the price point we're looking at right now, it's pretty darn impressive. How much of the allocation of those assets the software will allow us to do until we go down the road of installing a third-party OS is still yet to be seen. But still, nonetheless, for this price point and the hardware architecture we're looking at, I've got to praise both the artful construction of this so far, and indeed the amount of bang for your buck and oomph for your shumph that you're getting for this money. And for the particular nerds amongst you, I will highlight that right now, this motherboard here that we're utilising for this pre-launch model is the UGREEN CM718 main Vol 3 2349. So let's see if this is the motherboard that you guys are going to receive if you end up backing this, because it will be very interesting to see when we deep dive a little bit more into the software capabilities and the performance capabilities of those individual drives that the system's going to have, to see if what's good, what's bad, and ultimately what this will compare like to the unit that will eventually get distributed if this makes it through crowdfunding. But for that, we're going to need to put this back together and make our way over to the PC. Let's go. So let's talk about the software that arrives with this tiny little flash now. So I'm going to start with all of the positives and then move on to the negatives. But I will say we're not going to deep dive this software here because, frankly, I already have. Linked in the description is a 45-minute deep dive into the entirety of the UGREEN's UGREEN NAS Software beta. I covered a lot, and in particular, I go into a lot of detail about the mobile application, which I really do recommend you check out. It is a very, very good mobile app. The rest of the beta software certainly needs more time in the oven, but I recommend you check that out. But as it goes for the software right now, it has seen numerous updates during the time that I've had the device here in the studio. Currently running version 10.0.0518. This software is, not too shabby right now. They've added a few extra features, such as the improved access to Docker. So you've got their first party application there, or at least a mounted access to the Docker repository. And from this, we were able to run Plex Media Server. And with Plex Media Server, we were able to do a lot of testing on this device and the DXP4800 Plus. So these things are running pretty darn well. The file manager is as intuitive as you would like, with everything exactly where you want it to be, even comparative to other NAS brands. The control panel is very innovative, very responsive, and does everything that I want it to do, with automated updates coming all the way through, hardware and power monitoring, lots of controls and configuration choices. Also, although the network connectivity on this device isn't perfect, as mentioned earlier on, with a single 10G rather than a failover port, it's a bit annoying. And also, I don't really like the fact that I still can't set that MTU above 1500, by the way. Seriously, UGREEN, sort that out. I will say I like the fact there is the wireless connectivity. It's still a little buggy, but I do like the fact that I can connect this device to my local area network. There's a list of all the Wi-Fi connections in my local area network, but again, it does feel ever so slightly buggy. But at the very least, I can go ahead and connect with these networks if I choose. But as you can see, it's still a little bit buggy. It's still pushing out those warning notifications, and it does feel that the wireless connectivity on this device, although it's good to have it, is still far away from maturity, at least at this stage. But as you can see, it says that I'm connected, even though I'm getting connection timeouts all over the place. But at the very least, you've got an option, a partial option of a failover there for that Wi-Fi connection. And the same goes if you want to go ahead and kind of utilize it in reverse. Apparently that is an option, but to what extent this Wi-Fi can be connected to, it's hard to say. And I think much like the Thunderbolt connection, where UGREEN is saying that that connection is going to have a variety of access down the line, but at the current time it's only client utilization only. This Wi-Fi connection, much like the Thunderbolt connection, feels like something that hasn't completed development there. The Wi-Fi connection, UGREEN were telling me that it can work in both directions, whereas the Thunderbolt connection is currently host controlled only and therefore can only be used for storage drives. But they say that they're going to try and work on getting that working both ways. But again, that's a big if. And I think with the Wi-Fi connection, if they can get it working and it's stable, that'll at least serve as a failover over the top of that 10GBE connection. But right now, I'm not going to call it the most stable, and certainly presentation-wise, it is sending me mixed messages. Another interesting note about the UNAS system here is when you utilize storage volumes that have been pulled out or backed up. What I've done just now, as you can see on the top right of the screen, is I've gone ahead and connected an external drive. This is a USB Type 4 and Thunderbolt 4 docking station that I've connected into one of the available ports there. As you can see, it's not affected the range of drives that are available. The storage management, there's still only one volume visible to us here, utilizing that original drive there. But when we go into the file manager, we can see that alongside the shared drives and the user folder, If we go into the peripheral, we've now got our UGREEN data disk here. We've got a UGREEN data disk here, which has got all of the data, as you can see from the date there, the 20th of March. Today is the 3rd of April. All of that data there that was backed up onto that drive. Now, I do wonder about how much of that data has been carried over, and ultimately the fact that I could mount that drive does seemingly imply that there wasn't any kind of authentication or encryption preventing me from doing so. But as you can see there, I was able to utilize this drive that was utilized in our previous review when we had this drive inside the DXP4800 as a separate volume storage drive and the AGA test area that we created during the original review there of that four-bay system. But let's move some data over to this disk. Let's see with data that's living on the Gen 4x4 drive here in Bay 1 and move it over to this externally connected drive to see what speed we're going to get. So let's go in and grab ourselves some folders. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab these first three big folders here. Let's copy these and we're going to make our way into that external drive. We're going to create ourselves a brand new folder as well, just to make sure we don't get this mixed up over. Go for that, get that confirmed to put that inside, and we're going to copy that data in. And then from there, we'll be able to look at the task happening here at the top of the screen. So again, we're getting very fast speeds there for 20 gigabytes of data. And again, these are big blocky bits of data. It's kind of annoying that we can't actually see more than this. There is no means to monitor that performance, but that is still 20 gig of data that's, chucked onto that external drive pretty darn quick, and it's just super annoying that we don't have a really analytical way to bench test that external USB drive there. But overall, I'd say the performance isn't too bad, and for an NVMe 4 disk system, it's pretty darn good thus far. But as mentioned earlier on and in other videos, it just ain't perfect. This is beta software and it definitely feels that way. The fact that I can go into my account settings there and there's still no option for two-factor authentication super annoys me. The fact that if I go into the security tabs here, I've got options for files, I've got options for, adding different certificates like Let's Encrypt, but when I make my way into the likes of utilizing that security app there, if we go ahead and install that tool nice and easily, we're able to see that that tool isn't really doing much. It's protecting us from it's giving us antivirus and protection from malware, but this tool doesn't really give us much in the way of security precautions and scanning the system. I'll come back to that in just a moment. That criticism aside, I will say they do listen to their critics a little bit, and alongside softening their stance on third-party operating systems, I'm pleased to say that now by default, when we go into the terminal settings, SSH is now disabled by default in those recent updates. So I'm really pleased that the latest software, because I did a clean install with the latest firmware, that SSH is not enabled by default. I'm glad that's the case. However, there's still no write once read many when creating our new shared storage areas. When we create new storage pools, new storage areas, if we choose to use some of these disks and use them in new storage areas, unfortunately, there's still no option to encrypt these areas in the same way. We can go ahead and go with a JBOD basic, select ourselves one of these disks arbitrarily. Let's go for that disk there. And as we can see, we have to verify it. It's going to delete it if we proceed. But there isn't really the extra options there. We're still missing out on some of those background quality of life things that other NAS brands have been rocking out for quite a while there. Create ourselves a new volume, and as you can see, we can have the BTRFS, we can, expand the storage area, but again, options such as encryption, write once, read many are absent here, and that and the absence of something like two-factor authentication does lower a number of those security layers for a potential attack vector to be utilized. Which is why I'm so bummed out that that security manager doesn't really give me what I want. It's only scanning the system for potential malware intrusions, virus vulnerability intrusions of that nature. It's not scanning the system to tell me my passwords are too weak. It's not scanning the system to tell me I've got file transmission and file transfers such as FTP or SSH or Telnet activated that I need to disable. Not giving me recommendations on how to solidify the system in a way that other brands provide in their security managers. I don't quite know what this app is doing. But as mentioned, you can use third-party OSs. I managed to install TrueNAS very easily on this system. Started navigating there in the background to install TrueNAS with ease. The same goes, I went ahead with configuring different containers and more in TrueNAS. I went ahead and installed UnRAID via a USB on this system very, very easily. I went as far as putting Open Media Vault on this system, installing it there very, very easily. And again, whether it was Proxmox, whether it was installing pfSense, something I wanted to experiment with regard to the wireless connectivity, at least now we can use third-party OSs, and UGREEN are softening their stance on hardware support with this system in using them. Also, something I didn't cover in my previous review of the desktop model was to do with that HDMI output. If you are utilising one of the UGREEN NASs with an HDMI output, this is what you see via that HDMI. It's connected to your TV or your monitor, and you have to utilise the mobile application to push playback from the mobile device, a command to the data on the NAS, I should say, and then it will play it over the HDMI output. Currently, there is no means in order to do this if you want to use the web browser experience. So, for example, if I wanted to play back a file, let's go for this nice and simple file here, and I play it back here. It plays back in the window, but there's no option currently, no native right-click option, no playlist option to push or share the multimedia in here. Now, it may well be that it's an option in the control panel. I doubt it is, but if there is an option there, then I can't find it, and if it is there, it's not clear enough. Ultimately, I wish there was an option to push playback via the desktop, via the HDMI, not just the mobile app. It's useful to have it via the mobile app, don't get me wrong, but it still would have been good to have the option of doing it for both and streaming multimedia, not just to the HDMI, but also to other streaming boxes in the network environment. Now, when it comes to performance, there's still more to be done on this system. I've mounted that shared volume, as you can see there, that first volume there that's on a Gen 4 drive, that one there using BTRFS, and I've created a shared storage area there for these two drives. And I'm going to say straight away, I'm still not happy with the performance I'm getting from this system. I know it's far from release, but if I go ahead, for example, and copy a bunch of these files in, I know these are big, blocky, sequential data, but if I go ahead into this system here and paste these files, the performance numbers we're getting, they're good. They are good, but they're not great for 10 GBE, and look of that gutter ball that's happening there for the oversaturation of those drives. Now again, if I was able to tweak the MTU, if I was able to do some more investigative stuff with this system, which I can't really do at this time of recording, there's more that I could do there. The same goes when I use performance measurement tools such as AJA disk test there, where you configure some of the file sizes. It allows you to see a little bit more about what this system can do, and I'm still not able to get really more than about 600 to 700 megabytes per second via that 10 GBE connection, which on an NVMe system is not great. If we use Crystal Disk Mark here, as you can see, we're going to select Drive W. There is Drive W right there. And if we go into the network configuration settings, you're able to see that I am indeed connected here over a 10 GBE connection, and we're on that same IP there. And given I'm connected to an NVMe, I should be getting great numbers. Let's go for something small. Let's cut it some slack. We're going to go for just a simple 64 meg file. This should be giving us some decent numbers. This should fully saturate this system, and we allow it to do its thing there in the background. We'll fast forward. Now, I'm aware how messy this screen is, but let me make my point here. So on the top right of the screen there, you can see AJA bench testing that drive there. We can see it hitting around about 5 to 6, close to 700 megabytes per second there. On the bottom right of the screen there, you can see just what AJA is actually utilizing there via the network controller. So again, those numbers are accurate. This is what we're going through on that network interface. And indeed, if we have a look at the network connection that we're running so far as is, you're able to see, again, as shown earlier on, that we are running on a 10 gigabit connection. We are running on that absolutely fine. The bandwidth is there. I wish I could set up the MTU, but the system simply won't let me. On top of that, when we did our testing here using Crystal Disk, we did see a peak of write performance actually crossing into that gigabyte line there. But again, it wasn't consistent. Further testing that we did with a larger file there at 1 gig pretty much averaged out again at 6/5. And if we go into Atto Disk Benchmark there, we can see Atto Disk Benchmark all the way down did get high at points, but again still averaged out around 600 to 700 megabytes per second, with a few peak write performances down here within Atto Disk Benchmark there, and all the way through you've seen AJA rocking the tree there. But don't get me wrong, I know there is going to be an impact of OBS as you've seen there on screen, but these are still lesser numbers than I would have expected from an NVMe system over 10 GBE, and much like we saw in the DXP4800 Plus, I do think optimization of that 10 GBE and the system performance is still needed on this prototype pre-release system. So that's enough of the UGREEN software. Let's make our way into Putty and find out more about the back end of this device, because we want to see just what the allocation is for all of that hardware. One of the earliest things I noticed was to do with the Thunderbolt connection there. The Thunderbolt connection, as we scroll through, we found out is actually on a 2.5 gigatransfer lane times 4 there. So if we find it as we cycle through, as you can see, the Thunderbolt 4 connection there is on that 2.5 gigatransfer times 4 lane allocation there for the Thunderbolt 4 PCIe route. But when we broke down more and more into the back end of this system, I just kept coming back to weird inconsistencies. So for example, I would look at the layout and the lanes of the 10 GBE connection on the rear of the device, and that 10 GBE, that Quantia controller that we've already discussed, is sitting there on a relatively decent amount of lane allocation, 8 gigatransfer times 4 or a 3 times 4 lane there. Digging into that primary SSD slot there, that Gen 4 times 4 drive, as you can see, it is running on that 16 gigatransfers by 4 or Gen 4 times 4. It has got no downgrade, it's got no cap, it's running on 4 times 4. The same goes for the second drive there, that crucial drive, once again is running on 4 by 4, and again no drop, no decrease, no downgrade there in terms of that network connection there. But as we cycle through the rest of the system and we find that external drive that we currently got connecting, that is an external E18 Phison controller SSD. That external drive that's been connected via a Thunderbolt bridge, the Thunderbolt external dock on that external drive, you can see is downgraded to 8 times 4 there. So that is effectively Gen 3 times 4 speed there. That is what we're working with on that external Thunderbolt connection, and I wonder if that's being shared across both ports, thereby creating 20 gigabit per connection there rather than 40 gigabit for each individual Thunderbolt USB Type-C connection there. Overall, I like the layout of what they've done to cram so much into this small little box here, but it has to be said that compromises have clearly been made, and although the Gen 4 times 4 allocation is still very clear on those two drives, it does make me wonder if they're being passed through any kind of PCIe controller in the middle that is a potential bottleneck. Now, performance numbers on these drives are a little harder to nail down. As you can see there, some of the performance numbers we're seeing there towards the end, clearly caching is kicking in there in the background. We saw some good early numbers, and I think the more reliable numbers are one we were utilizing there at the end with HD Palm. But what about if we go ahead with a few more tests on this as we try to verify this performance number, and then we do some copying from one drive to the other. Copying from one drive to the other certainly gave us a much more realistic understanding of what was going on inside there, and we were still hitting that internal transfer there of 2.8 gigabytes. Now, to put that into perspective, that is still a great deal higher than the 1.5 gigabytes that we saw on the Pentium powered model, and this is still copying data from one of those SSDs internally to the other in slots 1 and 2, but that still maintains that there is some kind of little bottleneck there happening in the background between all of these, for all of these drives being handled. And although I do believe that these drives are indeed Gen 4 times 4 on slots 1 and 2, I do think they're all being fed into a network controller there, or a PCIe controller that is throttling them ever so slightly. The performance numbers are alright, but they're certainly not as good as I would have liked to have seen on this system. But again, pre-release, prototype, lots of optimization to go, so we do have to hold off judgment ever so slightly. So, what do I think of it? Well, I think you know what I think, and this is a good idea, and it's a good NAS, but it ain't finished. Much like when I reviewed the DXP4800 Plus, this system has got a lot going for it, and frankly, there isn't another system like it in the market. But then, this isn't in the market either, is it? It's still going through crowdfunding, and it doesn't feel finished. And for all of the good things about it that I liked, there was almost equal amount of things that I didn't, which hopefully all of which will see improvement via that crowdfunding model. What did I like? One, look at the size of it. It's absolutely tiny. Right now, we've got a mini PC here. We've got a mad seagull up there. We've got hard drives here. We've got phones here. Look at the scale of this system versus all of these. For 4 NVMe drives in a compact system like this is a phenomenal amount of potential in terms of performance and storage in such a small casing. On top of that, how many NASs have you seen me on the channel wave around while they're powered on during an outro? It weighs sod all. And right now it is this close to the mic, making next to no noise whatsoever. The point I'm making is this is an incredibly unique device. They've managed to maintain the cooling on the system, the size of the system, the storage and the power, and done a very good job of maintaining a very good price point. But the performance is not what it should be. The Wi-Fi connectivity of this device doesn't quite work as good as they say, and it still needs improvement. The Thunderbolt connectivity on this, although good, isn't exactly what everybody wants in terms of Thunderbolt connectivity when you're looking at brands like QNAP doing that host client two-way connectivity on the device. The M2 NVMe's, but 2 of which being Gen 4x4 being great, still don't seem to give me that full performance that I'd like from there. And the other 2 NVMe's been scaled down to Gen 3x2, although necessary, may annoy some users. The noise level of the system when in operation is very good. But I will say that the system software still has a lot of work to do. And although it has seen improvements in that software and UGOS compared to when we reviewed that previous unit, updates, by the way, which necessitated that entire section of the video required to be refilmed because it actually fixed a bunch of stuff, still has room for improvement and still needs to be further ahead than it is. It is a good system, and I would add, if you're already on the fence for this device for crowdfunding, I think what we've seen here is enough to make me think they are going to take it seriously. How seriously? I'm not sure. Will this brand still continue to make NASs after that crowdfunding? I think they will. I don't think this is going to be a one-off. They've done far too good a job and gone far too far in creating a brand aesthetic for these devices to make this end at crowdfunding. I will also say that I think this is not going to be the system that users are going to receive. I think they are going to receive an improved version of this because I've had this now for about 4 to 5 weeks, and the improvements that I have witnessed in terms of the software, in the regularity of updates, as well as the improved software experience for other reviewers on YouTube that we talked about, has been visible. But it's just not finished yet. And as long as this system is still going through crowdfunding, that means there is still room for that improvement to happen. But of course, that also means that there is the chance of sod all happening. Ultimately, for what this system is and the price tag it's arriving at, even at the RRP, it's surprisingly well equipped in terms of hardware. But in terms of the software, not so convinced. But then again, UGREEN has since softened its stance on support of third-party operating systems on these devices. So you may not be completely locked in with their software anyway, even if it does make it through crowdfunding and doesn't see the improvements in write once, read many encryption and protections and security controls and two-factor authentication that I would like to see. Nevertheless, right now in terms of hardware, this thing is solid and unbeatable. But that's if it makes it through crowdfunding. Remember that. Apart from that, thank you so much for watching. There are links in the description to not only this crowdfunding that's happening with UGREEN, but other resources, other videos from the software to the hardware to Plex and more, all linked in the description, written and video. Check those out. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.